Hi friends, welcome to my first tutorial. We're gonna do an animated butterfly today without any complicated animation or rigging or you name it. I try to keep it as simple as possible, but bear in mind it's my first tutorial, so it might be still a bit complicated at times. So let's get into it.
The first step is looking for reference images and prepare them to use them later in Blender. I went to Pinterest and scrolled through some images of butterflies, and as soon as I found one that I liked, I saved it as butterfly image, but you can really call it whatever you want.
We will open that file in Photoshop to create an alpha mask, because we need this to later define the shape of the wings of the butterfly that we're gonna model. So we need a black and white image. I cleaned it up a bit so that the body is not visible, because I'm not gonna need that, but really don't worry about it too much at this point. Saved it as alpha.
And that's already the preparation for the modeling of our base.
I opened my Finder and just drag and drop the image that I just saved into Blender and arranged it in the middle using the S and G shortcuts to have it perfectly in the middle. I would do this from a top view, so it's the easiest to model the butterfly later. I continued with the plane, which is the base for the wing. Then I head over to the modifiers tab and use the subdivision surface modifier as well as a mirror modifier. The thing is, it's important that you mirror the object in the middle of the scenes. But what I usually do is just create empty. So I'll just mirror everything on that mirror object. I don't know, that's just a thing I do. I don't know if it's the easiest way, but for me it works. So yeah, then I continued with modeling my wings, just according to the reference image. This is really basic. I just subdivided the plane one time and dragged the vertices into their position, and yeah, this is really rough. Then I added the lower wings, also with the same procedure, subdivision surface modifier, and afterwards also a mirror modifier, again mirroring the object on the empty, that's called mirror. And again here I just went to edit mode and subdivided it one time, scaled it up with S, and then I just moved the vertices around so they kind of fit my butterfly. This doesn't have to be perfect because we're gonna use the alpha mask later on anyways to make the wings. Yeah, but so far looks fine. I quickly made a new collection with my wings, so everything is a bit more orderly. I turned off the visibility for them. And yeah, we continue with the base of the body. Here I used the cube to model the body, and also subdivision and mirror modifier again. Here it's important that you check clipping, so the both objects, like the mirrored spheres, will merge together. Or like spheres, it's a cube, but like the mirrored object will merge together. And then in edit mode I can just clip them together and start modeling. The way I do it is just with extruding, super easy, and scaling it up and extruding again and kind of building my base body with that method. In the end I had to see the body from the side because with all the scaling, it distorts the body a bit in a way that I didn't want to. It's important that you have your X-ray mode turned on so you can grab both vertices in the front and in the back. Then I just shuffled them around a bit so it looked a bit more natural, I guess. And after that I also added a UV sphere to the scene. Again, I mirrored it on the mirror object. Same procedure again, and just kind of shuffled them to the right spot that I wanted them to be. I added a Bezier curve to model the, how is it called in English? This front thingies that the butterfly has. I need to Google that. I have no idea how it's called. But for that it's easiest to take a curve object and go down to green tab In the bevel, just add a little bit of depth so the curve becomes visible. In edit mode, I scaled the ends of the curve to my liking, so the end is kind of smaller than the beginning. I did that with Option S. Then I moved the endpoints around so it fit more to the original picture. I also added this kind of tiny little ends. The way I did that was also mirror modifier, again mirror the object and subdivide it just a ton of times. And and then I shaped them in the edit mode so they looked a bit more like the reference picture.
Here you see a little speed ramp of the following process where I did some sculpting to the body. First, just make sure that you apply all the modifiers so you can sculpt properly, because otherwise it won't work. Third step is the animation of the wings. What I did here was also convert the wings into a mesh, because like that it applies the modifiers automatically. So I have the subdivided mesh as a base mesh, and I left the mirror modifier on. I just applied the other ones. So here you can see the mesh is now subdivided, and I added a simple deform modifier, which is our animation modifier, and you can already see how the wings get shaped in a more organic way. And we're using this value to animate the wings and make this flying motion. It is important here that you set the origin to the 3D cursor, because like this it will deform the mesh from the 3D cursor and not from the center of the mesh, if that makes sense. 3D cursor is this red and white thing in the middle, and you can see the orange dot that is moving to another place where it will deform from. So yeah, that's basically already it. I set some keyframes, and that's the base animation. You can copy the keyframes just in a rhythm, but you can also just add a cycles modifier to the keyframes in the graph editor. On the last point of your graph, just add a modifier on the right and choose cycles. I also added a little rotation on the, what is that axis? X, Y? I think it's not Z. Anyways, I also added a little rotation on another axis. I think it's the X-axis. I'm so sorry, guys. To make it look a bit more natural. And that's what I'm doing in this little speed ramp. But it's not necessary. It's just a little tweak that I wanted to do to make it look better. Next step is shading. We're starting out with the shader for the wings, so we add a new shader in the shaders tab and add an image texture. And here we choose the image that is also our reference image, just a basic image of the butterfly, and connect it to the base color. And you can already see something happening, and we go over to UV editing because we need to kind of UV-Unwrap this, but it's really easy, so don't worry. We choose project from view, and then we shuffle the vertices around so it fits perfectly on the wing on the left side. Same procedure with the lower wings. We go to UV editing, we choose the right material, and then we are good to go for our wings. But there is a little something that we have to consider here. We also did our alpha mask in Photoshop, and this is especially useful if you have like more complicated edges of the butterfly and more like distorted or whatever, like frizzy, because like this you can just fake the edges. You go over again to the shading tab and add a new image texture and load in the alpha mask and plug that into the alpha. And you can see how the wings are now more defined in the original look. Did some last tweaks here and there to make the mesh a bit more believable, but that was about it. And then I did a little basic shader for the body. where I used an ambient occlusion and a color ramp to create this kind of shadows and gradient kind of ambient occlusion, I guess, for the base color. And then I also just played around with the other like shading plugs, but I'm really not the best with shading, so please don't take this as a tutorial. That's why I'm also speed ramping it. So let's move on to setting up the scene and rendering. First, I changed the world to black. I find this way more easier to navigate the lights because you don't have this gray kind of generic background light. And then I went over to Blender Kit, which I can recommend highly as an add-on, and looked for a stone, which I wanted to sit the butterfly on, and downloaded that and added it into the scene. After that, I also changed the camera settings, changed the focal length to 100 and shuffled the camera around so I had a good kind of view of the scene. What I can highly recommend doing in a situation where your object is not like super insanely good, like this one, I would say it's like not my best object or model for sure. It's just to play with the light so it kind of highlights the good areas of the object and makes the bad areas kind of disappear a bit, if that makes sense. So as a next step, I added a cube as a volume to have this kind of grain in the image, or like volume, it's like a mist kind of. So I added that and also added a cone light. It's actually called spotlight. And here you have to up the value quite a bit and also decrease the spot size depending on your liking, how you want the look to be of your light. I also increased the blend value so it's like not as harsh. Tried some different angles to hit the butterfly in a nice angle and make it look kind of good. Also, what I would really recommend is using depth of field in the camera settings. This really makes your render look more natural. And also in this case I used motion blur to blur the wing movement, which looks more natural than without the motion blur.
That was basically it for today's tutorial. I hope you had fun and things were kind of more or less clear for most parts, and let me know in the comments down below if you didn't understand something, and let me know what kind of tutorials you would like to have. Bye and thanks for watching!